I don't have to present or introduce Jaime Harrison because Jaime Harrison's body of work has done all the presenting and the introducing on its own. But Jaime, every chance I get, because I promised my mother I would do this, I love telling the story of how in 2009, I was working for a small communication shop in South Carolina. And I emailed you and said, I want to come spend a week with you. And you responded back per the usual, absolutely. And I borrowed money to get on a plane, only my second time in my life being on an airplane, to come spend a week with you. And that week changed my life personally, and it changed my professional career forever. And I will never, ever forget that. And I told you then, and I will always say this to you, whatever Jaime Harrison does, Antjuan Seawright will support. I'll tell you another funny story and we'll get right to it. When I ran for office in 2012, I lost. And my mother was like, oh, you did a good job. You got time to do it again. But when your Senate race ended and you did not come across the finish line first, my mother called me with tears in her eyes. We were on a FaceTime and I said, well, how did you crying over Jaime's race and not crying over mine? And she said, Jaime Harrison is like my son. And because of what he's been to you, he is just that special to me. So thank you for being there for me, Jaime. Let's get right to it, Jaime.
Yeah.
You're no stranger to Third Way, and thankfully Third Way is no stranger to you. But let's talk about you for a second. That modern day R&B philosopher by the name of Fantasia says sometimes you have to lose to win again. You did not come across the finish line first in your Senate race, but most people would declare that you came out a real winner. Talk about what that journey has been from then, post the race, and to this point now of you being named DNC chairman by President Biden.
Yeah. Antjuan, I remember in the closing days of the campaign, there were a number of reporters who came to me and asked about the end results. And I told them, I said, you don't understand. Before any ballot is even counted, I've already won. Folks counted me out from the very start. They said that there was no way that we would be able to compete. There was no way that we could raise as much money as Lindsey Graham. There's no way I would beat him in a debate. There's no way that we do any of these things. And we proved them wrong. But that's beside the point. The most important part of me running was that it inspired the next generation of leaders in South Carolina. I cannot tell you, man, even to this day, I can walk into a grocery store, I can go into a restaurant, I can stop at the bank, and I see someone and they will tell me, they'll say, you know what? My son or my daughter, or my grandson or my granddaughter, they're still talking about your campaign and your race. And they go around and say, my name is Jaime Harrison and I approve this message. Right? And they told me and said, my children have never been involved in politics, never even interested in politics. But because of your race, you inspired them and you gave them hope. And Antjuan, I remember the reason why I got into politics is because in 1988, I was this round-headed boy in Orangeburg sitting, watching TV, watching Jesse Jackson give a speech at the Democratic Convention in 1988. Also a little round-headed boy from Greenville, South Carolina, and he was talking about hope and how young people could get involved. And he inspired me to look at politics and look at how you can fundamentally change the life of people. So even though I did not win, if my campaign helped to inspire the next governor from South Carolina, the next senator from South Carolina, just the next doctor or lawyer from this great state, then we've already won, man. And I know that we have. And so I feel good about it. And, my grandma is a firm believer, when one door closes, the good Lord opens up another. And that's what he did for me.
Well, he opened up a door, and now you are the DNC chairman. Jaime, what will be your focus as DNC chair? You will, some would argue, you go into this job punching above the weight. I declare, because I know who you are, you will do so much blocking and tackling. People are going to really have an appreciation for the kind of player you are on the field. So talk about your focus as DNC chair going into the next several years.
Yeah, well, Antjuan, I hope folks have seen that this is already a very different DNC, one that is much more on the offense than the defense. We're not playing defense right now at the DNC. We are going on the offense. We are the political arm and the political mouthpiece of this administration and Democrats in Congress and all across the country. And we're going to do a very good job and a very aggressive job of selling the agenda of the Democratic Party, talking about the leadership that you see in the White House, that you see in Congress, that you see in our states. And at the same time, while we're talking about our accomplishments, we are going to educate the American people on the incompetence that is coming from the other side of the aisle. The fact that we passed the American Rescue Plan because help is now here. When we knew that people were still desperate, that businesses were failing, that people still needed money, they were being evicted from their homes, that schools weren't opening because they didn't have the proper funding, that healthcare, there was concerns and needs there. And we put money in pockets, we put people back in their jobs, vaccines and arms, and kids are back into school. And that was done because of the leadership of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Democrats in the House and the United States Senate. And Antjuan, in addition to that, not one Republican voted for the legislation. Now, some of them have already tried to take credit for it, but this is our job at the DNC, is to tell the truth. And we are going to tell the truth about how none of these people actually did anything to lift a finger in order to help their folks in the greatest time of need. Now, had it been some of these big companies and all that, they would have crawled all over each other to pass a tax cut for those folks. But working people in this country are the backbone of this nation, and we got to help them when they need the help. And that is what we have done with this new leadership that we have in the White House and in Congress. And this DNC has been aggressive in selling that. We are in addition to selling the accomplishments, we're also going to strengthen our party, and we're going to do that on a state-by-state basis. We have a 57 states and territory strategy where we're going to make sure that our state parties are strong and that they can support our candidates as they run up and down the ballot.
Jamie, just sticking on this highway for a second, the DNC did something that we have not seen before, perhaps. And I say perhaps because it's give or take. The DNC ran ads and had an aggressive outreach strategy very soon after the passage of what I call the American Survival Act. No disrespect to the White House, but literally what they call the American Recovery Act is the American Survival Act in my mind. But why did you think, as chair, that was necessary to do to get into the bloodstream right away?
Well, Antjuan, you know, you and I both hold Jim Clyburn up to be a political dad in a sense. And, you know, the one thing he teaches you is to learn from your history. We know the history of what happened in 2009 when Barack Obama became president of the United States and passed the stimulus legislation to bring, again, coming after a Republican president who wrecked stuff, to fix all of that. Well, the problem is they passed the legislation and they didn't promote it. They didn't go out to let the American people know that it was them who actually did it and provide the resources. And they allowed Republicans to take credit for something that they didn't do. Well, we learned from that past mistake. We weren't going to go down that same road. We were going to make sure that we aggressively went out and told the story of how this legislation passed and how no Republican actually supported it. And we're going to continue to tell the story. I want folks to understand this. If you get tired of hearing me talk about the American Rescue Plan, well, I'm sorry, because you're going to hear me talk about this plan from now until November of next year, because it will be this plan that was the foundation to really get the nation out of the ditch. We see it in terms of vaccines right now. We see it in terms of money in pockets. You know, when people can make memes out of stimulus checks, you know, they're talking about the stimmy. You know, that means that you are successful at breaking through on all levels about how you have helped people in this country.
I'll tell you a funny story, Jamie. I was in the barbershop this weekend with my mask on, of course, and they were talking about Biden bucks and Kamala cash. And I said, America is back. Help is here. And I felt really, really, really good about it. Jamie, elections are about constituencies and coalitions. The concrete, I think, or the core of the coalition any given day to elect Democrats is rooted in Black people.
Yes.
The Black vote. We also know the importance or the significance of engaging all voters of color. So let's talk about engaging. Let's start with the African American vote, the most loyal voting bloc in a generation. How will you as chair make certain that Black voters do not feel like they're being pimped every given election cycle? Show up 30 days before and no more until 4 years later or 2 years later. What will you do to make certain there's not that sense in the Black community?
Well, Antjuan, thank you for bringing this up. Listen, I think Black voters, like all voters, want to feel as though that they are being seen, that they're being heard, and that they're being valued on all aspects of it. So we need to make sure that the representation in this government, in the leadership of the DNC and in our government, that our government looks like our community. It looks like America. Joe Biden has done that in spades. He has made sure on all levels that African Americans are represented in all levels. And today we just had a number of appointments about Black women being appointed to the federal judiciary. We've seen it in terms of his cabinet. We've seen it in terms of his selections of staff at the White House. We see it at the DNC as well. So that's the first step. The second step is we need to make sure that we're investing in the communities that have supported us getting to where we are. We saw it in the American Rescue Plan in terms of actually addressing systemic issues. Systemic issues, particularly with Black farmers over decades, over generations. And Joe Biden said this has been a problem, a persistent problem. And you know what? I'm going to address it. And we're going to make sure that we repair the issue and the problem. And we're going to continue to see Joe Biden focus on the issues that are important to the American people. Now, what we are going to do at the DNC is make sure that we are aggressively going into communities and embedding ourselves, not 3 months or a month before the election, but right now. Starting this summer, we hope to initiate our organizing effort to be on the ground, embedded in Black and Brown and Native communities, talking to those folks, hiring some of those folks, and making sure that they are part of our outreach efforts. We're also going to do things like we did in South Carolina, Antjuan, our Democrats Care efforts, where we are not only just looking at what we can do in government to help families, but what we can do in our private lives to also help people address the issues they're dealing with. Ultimately, I want the Democratic Party not to be a political organization, but to be a community organization that is addressing the issues that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Speaking of the village, because we all know it takes a village to raise a child, as we learned in South Carolina, but it takes a village to win elections. Part of the village, we talk about Black voters, but let's talk about all other elements of voters of color, from our AAPI brothers and sisters. By the way, we stand solid and strong with them through all the foolishness that they're having to experience in this country. But our Latino brothers and sisters, one of the fastest growing populations in the country. And also other Native, we talk about Native groups and so forth. What are you planning to do? What's your strategy to engage those constituents? In particular, we had a surge in turnout for Democrats among Asian American brothers and sisters. But with our Latino voters, we have some work to do. So what is your plan to make sure that we close those gaps and make sure people are not voting against their interests at the ballot box? Yeah.
Well, Antjuan, across the board, we have to do a better job of engaging our various constituencies at the DNC. We have a strong foundation, but we got to build upon that. And when you look at these communities, you look at the AAPI community, you look at the Native community, you look at the Latino community. All in any given one of these states, these communities made the difference in terms of having us actually between winning and losing on the presidential level, and also in some of these highly contested Senate races. We have to continue that engagement. So again, we had last cycle, we had a program called Organizing Corps, where we recruited over 1,000 young people from the communities that we are talking about right now, and we trained them to be organizers in their community. The vast majority of them were people of color. It also included a great representation of the LGBTQ plus community as well. So we are looking at what is the next version of that organizing effort. We're going to do that same thing. In the Latino community specifically, we got to understand, and I think this is representative of all the communities, we're not monoliths. Like in the Black community, it's not a monolithic. In the Latino community, it's not monolithic. And so therefore, our messages have to be nuanced to the various divisions and groups within the one big group. And sometimes that has not been the case. You know, folks think, well, I can take a message, I can translate it in Spanish, and that's good enough. No. Depending on where these folks are coming from, what country of origin and all, the mentality, the cultures are all different, and that we have to have that nuance in order to get the turnout and the engagement that we really need. And so we will be hitting the ground running, partnering with folks in those communities, embedded in those communities who know the people, who the people respect, and utilizing them to be the mouthpieces of the DNC. That's going to be really important, and we're going to do that across in Black radio, Latino radio, local newspapers that are in the languages of the people. We're going to be engaged across the board, making sure that we're talking to folks, and again, not just before the election, but right now.
Jamie, let's talk rural voters for a second. You have a personal passion for it. You and I both come from rural communities. We all know that if we're going to win elections in the future, this narrative cannot be that Republicans own rural voters and rural constituencies in this country. What is your plan to make sure we engage rural communities so we're not just known as the urban and suburban party?
Yeah. Well, you know, many times, Antjuan, folks ask me, Jamie, well, what kind of Democrat are you? Are you a blue dog? Are you progressive? Are you this and that? I said, I'm a dirt road Democrat. I grew up on a dirt road. So I know the joys and also the hardships of growing up in rural America. And so one of the things that we have to do as a party is, first of all, we got to show up. Right. You know, for many times, we as Democrats have just relied on our strength, which has been the urban vote. And therefore, that's where we've concentrated our resources and our efforts, and we've just not showed up into rural communities. So first, we show up. Second of all, we listen, and we listen to them about what they believe are solutions to the problems that they have. And then our role is with the hands on the leverage of government, is to make sure that we take their solutions and actually try to implement them and address the issues that are specifically targeted to them. In South Carolina, 38% of rural communities have no access to broadband. And if you look at rural America, that is a persistent issue. You also see that many of their rural hospitals are starting to close. A persistent issue. We also see that farmers have problems dealing with, just the right to fix their own equipment, a persistent issue. And so part of what we have to do as Democrats is speak the language of the people and the communities that we're going into so that they understand that we see them, we hear them, we value them, and most importantly, we are going to fight and work for them. And I think this administration is going to have a number of things to roll out soon that will really, really help some of our rural communities.
Jamie, let's talk young people.
Yes.
You have been a big advocate for making sure we build the next generation of leaders. You started a program in South Carolina, Clyburn Fellows, that has had handsome success. But if you listen to the DC bubble, if you pay attention to the Twitter narrative, which we know does not always get it right, all you hear is Democrats do not have a bench. They're not doing anything to prepare the next generation of leaders, et cetera. So I'm gonna ask you two questions in one thought.
Yep.
What are you doing, or what are we doing, or what are we going to do to make sure that we keep those young voters that showed up, many for the first time in the 2020 election, keep them engaged and involved in the process? And what is your plan to make sure we have a bench that's prepared to come in and take over the game when others decide that it's time for them to hang up their uniform?
Yeah. Well, the one thing I think folks have to understand is the young people of today are very different from the previous generation. Young folks of today are very much more skeptical of affiliations or groups, political, becoming a member of the Democratic Party. When I grew up, that's the thing that you wanted to do, right?
Yes.
Young people today, they don't want to be a member of the Democratic Party, but that doesn't mean that their values and the way that they look at the world is all that different from some of the priorities and the values of the Democratic Party. So again, it's about going to people where they are. Instead of asking them to come to us, we go to where they are and make sure that we provide them opportunities to say, listen, on this issue of climate change, this is something where we have a lot of agreement. Why don't we work on this? Why don't we partner on this? Why don't we try to move forward on that? And so, again, we don't need them to be a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party, but we do need them to support Democratic Party members who share their values. And we have to do a better job of articulating those values to those young people so that they can see that there's some affinity between where they are and where we are. And it's providing opportunities for them to see that. We're going to have a lot more engagement programs working with our college Dems, our high school Dems, and our young Democrats. I've been in a lot of conversations about programs to do just that. We also need to be very understanding that, take for instance, in some of our constituency groups, young Black folks and older Black folks don't see the world in the same way. And so therefore you can't use the same message and you can't use the same mediums, right, to deliver that message. So that's something that we are very, very cognizant of and are going to make sure that we adjust our efforts to deal with. On the pipeline issue in terms of grooming the next talent, that's something near and dear to my heart. I mean, I've even written a book about how you get young people involved in politics called Climb the Hill. What we are going to do is what we tried to do here in South Carolina, and I would say we had great success. We started a fellowship program here in South Carolina called the James E. Clyburn Political Fellowship to groom the next generation of candidates and county leaders and state leaders. It's been very, very successful. We're going to take that fellowship model and put it in a box and ship it out to all of our 50 states and our territories and all so that they can begin grooming the next generation. I'm also looking at a special national fellowship program that I'm going to be working with a number of groups to put on. So we will have a dedicated program to really improve the pipeline that we have.
Well, Jamie, thanks to you, and I shared this with Chairman Thompson when he was on this dialogue, I was able to go through the Congressional Black Caucus Institute.
The boot camp, yeah.
And that was a difference maker. So I'm so happy to hear that there are going to be programs very similar to the CBCI boot camp, because that was a game changer in so many ways. Jamie, you touched on this, but I really want you to move away from the flirting and really date this for a second. The 57 state and territory engagement. Yeah. You talked about it. You've been on the record about it. If you can unload for us what that looks like and what is your plan in terms of fitting that into strengthening state parties, because we all know the state parties were very instrumental and loud about their support for you because you were a state party chair. In fact, the first African-American state party chair in the state of South Carolina. Yeah.
Well, listen, and I'm going to back this up a little bit to understand why do we need a 57 states and territories strategy. Part of this is for far too long, Democrats have been ceding territory to Republicans. And what do I mean by that? You got some Democrats who say, well, I don't know, why are we competing in South Carolina? That's a red state. Why are we doing something in Mississippi or Alabama? That's a red state. Folks, understand this, that those red states send 2 United States senators to Washington, D.C. So regardless if you live in a blue state, purple state, or red state, those folks that come from those red states are going to implement laws, pick judges, and everything else that impact you in those blue states or in those purple states. And Republicans don't think in this manner because you got states like Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland, blue states, but they all have Republican governors. Now, if those Republicans thought, well, it's a blue state, there's no way that we can win in that blue state, so we might as well not compete, then why the hell do they have Republican governors sitting right now in the governor's mansions that can have an impact on redistricting, that can have an impact on all of these other things that go on in their individual states? So let's get out of this mentality. Let's start building up some political muscle, because we will only be as strong as our weakest link. If we got parties in this country that cannot compete, that can barely keep their lights on, that can't field good candidates or support their good candidates, then it's very, very difficult. We didn't get Georgia and Arizona overnight. We got it because of some investment and a lot of hard work. In order to get the next Georgia and the next Arizona, we got to look across our country and figure out which states are in that next generation, where that if we invest in them for the next 4, 6, 8 years, we help them build a pipeline of new candidates, then they can actually win. That's why the 57 states and territories strategy is so key and so important, because we need to strengthen every state party. So wherever there's Democrats, there's going to be the DNC. We're going to be invested in strengthening those state parties so that candidates like Stacey Abrams or candidates like Andrew Gillum or Beto O'Rourke not only shouldn't have to do they're doing the work of a candidate, but you don't want them to also have to do the work of a state party also. Because that's going to make it even more challenging for them to win. And so it's the key part for us to be competitive everywhere, but also for our candidates to break through and to make sure that we're not stuck in this 52-48 United States Senate limbo. I would love those days where we got 56, 57 Democratic votes in the United States Senate, and then we can actually really get a lot more done.
Speaking of votes, speaking of challenges, I caught some hell for saying this a couple of years ago, but I'm unapologetic about what I say, as you know, particularly when I'm on air. I said voting rights is the most consequential issue of our day, as it was for my sharecropping grandparents. We know after 2008, a surge in African-American turnout, a surge in youth turnout, voter ID laws were birthed in the South. They raised themselves across the country. 2020, surge in Black and brown turnout, surge in young people. The surge happened with early voting. Because of long lines, we had to give people food and water so they would not leave. We see perhaps the worst piece of voter suppression legislation that we can think of for our generation. What is the DNC going to do, Jamie, to fight back, push back, and beat the hell out of these voter suppression laws that are popping their way in over 40 states, 255 pieces, I'm told, already that's been introduced?
Antjuan, of all of the issues that we talk about, this one is probably the most personal to me. As someone who grew up here in South Carolina, one of the last things that I did with my grandfather, who passed away in 2004, was to actually vote. He passed away November 18, 2004, a little earlier in November, I think November 3rd or something, that Tuesday prior, he and I went to vote. We were voting for Inez Tenenbaum and all the other ones running for Senate and folks running that cycle. I remember sitting on the porch with him right after taking him to go vote, because he was a disabled amputee. And we were talking about everything. And then finally he turned serious and he grabbed my arm and he said, Baldy, that's my nickname. He said, in this state, big bald forehead. he said, in this state, they didn't always think I was a whole man. I said, yes, sir, I know that. He said, in this state, I couldn't always vote. I said, yes, sir, I know that too. He said, let me tell you something. You should never let anybody tell you that you don't matter. Never let anybody tell you that you don't count. What we are seeing right now, Antjuan, is Jim Crow 2.0. And I don't care what anybody says. That is what it is. It is Jim Crow's great-grandson and granddaughter, 2.0. And what they are saying, what the Republicans, and let me be more explicit, are saying is that certain people don't count, that they don't matter, that their votes are not as valuable as other people's votes. And as a party, for me, I want 100% participation in voting in this country. Does that mean I'm going to win every race? Probably not. But I believe that in the end of the day, as chair of the Democratic Party, that we can get into that arena, we can debate the issues, and we will have better candidates and better issues, and we can win the day. But I don't feel like we got to cheat in order to get into power. I wouldn't want to get into power that way. But what we see in the Republican Party right now is that they understand that the sands of this country are shifting and changing, and that the only way that they can win is by cheating. When you criminalize giving somebody a damn bottle of water, then that means that something is not right. When you make it harder for somebody to get a bottle of water than you do to get a gun, something is not right. And so we at the DNC are going to do everything in our power. Every drop of blood in my body, every breath that I take will be focused on making sure that we don't go back. We will not go back to Jim Crow. My sons, I can tell you this, my sons will not live in the way that my grandfather did. They were going to have to carry me out in a box if that's the case. They will not live that way. And so we have to do everything that we need to do in the courts, legislatively, in Congress, to make sure that we protect the right of not just Democratic voters, but all voters in this country. Our voting rights are the most sacred rights that we have as Americans. We send our sons and daughters overseas risking life and limb for democracy and the right to vote for other nations. But everything in this country, the Republicans basically do every damn thing that they can to take that right away from certain communities. And that is not right, and it won't stand. We're going to do everything we have to do, Antjuan, to make sure that people can vote in this country unencumbered.
You know, Jeremy, speaking of voting, you know, as Jim Cliver said, I love that damn word consequential. And I really, really do. But I tell you, you know, I said 18 was going to be the most consequential midterm election of my lifetime. And at that time it was, so I didn't lie. But now looking ahead, knowing we have all these things we have to do in order for the country to succeed, forget about Democrats, for the country to succeed, because we know when Democrats lead, the country succeeds. The 2022 midterms, what are Democrats doing to prepare for these consequential midterms when you think about states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Nevada, you know, all these places that will have, some will have governor's races and Senate races, some will have just Senate races, members of Congress. What are we doing to make certain we do not repeat the sins of the 2010 midterms? And Jamie, the second part I want to ask you is, how is redistricting factoring into the plans for the DNC in terms of dealing with 2022?
Well, Antjuan, I think the core and the heart of everything we do is around 3 words, and it's the same word: organize, organize, organize. We have to have we have to have folks on the ground, and they have to be from the communities, and they have to be embedded in those communities, not, you know, right close to election, but right now. And that's why we are looking at doing our organizing efforts, starting this summer and this fall in our battleground states, and then we'll expand that out to some of our other states. It is crucial that we do that. We've got to have people on the ground beginning to have those conversations, getting people registered to vote, making sure that folks are educated on the important issues, make sure that they know what their representatives have and have not done in order to represent them. All of those things are crucial and important. And so with that, I tell all folks, I can't pay for all that with my good looks, right? So we got to have resources. So people say, well, Jamie, I don't understand why you're raising money, because I can't just go to the young buck on the street and say, listen, we want you to be an organizer, and I can't pay you right now. But I mean, you got to pay people. You got to pay them what they're worth, and you got to invest in them. You got to make sure they have health care and all those other things. Well, folks, that ain't free. That takes some resources in order to do that. To fight these lawsuits, we spent $30 million on lawsuits and voter protection efforts at the DNC last cycle. I can't just go and tell a lawyer and say, you know what, what was it, Wimpy and Popeye? You give me a hamburger today, I'll give you 2 tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. You got to invest, and you got to do those things now, but you got to have the resources in order to do it. That's why I work so hard at fundraising and trying to make sure that we do have those resources to give us the flexibility and to make sure that our state parties are funded well and that our organization is strong for all of our candidates.
Jamie, I got to be selfish on my last question. I'm going to let you go because we need you to go back to raising money because, by the way, you had a very historic fundraising effort this first quarter. DNC, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
On that and to the team. But Jamie, why are groups like Third Way so important to making certain that we flow and function and work towards that more perfect union?
Yeah. Third Way is really, really important. And this is the thing that I tell folks is many times people, we come from a very diverse party, Antjuan, a party, and I know this all too well in my previous job that I had as Jim Clyburn's floor director in the whip's office. I had a 15-seat majority, and now that sounds like heaven to them now. I know they wish they had 15 seats, but at the time, there's a reason why I don't have any hair. But we had a 15-seat majority where we had, 50 Blue Dogs, 40 CBC members, 90 progressives, and at any given time, any one of those groups, along with the CHC and the KPAC, could all sync the legislation. But we had to learn out how to work together to move forward. In that time, we never lost one vote on the floor of the House because of Democrats, because we didn't have the votes in order to get it done. And that is because we utilize what I call, which is, our past may be different, Antjuan, but the destination has to be the same.
That's right.
It is how do we make America a better place for all of her people? And Third Way is a crucial component of helping us make that case, because everybody in our party isn't the most left and most progressive person in our party. Some people come from a business-friendly environment and they're more moderate. And so Third Way does a really, really good job of speaking to the issues that part of the party really is concentrated on and what they're concerned with. And they're trying to come up with solutions. And hopefully we're all trying to come up with solutions to the issues and problems that we're dealing with. And so, again, we're a big tent party. I love, it's like being a dad to a lot of different kids. I love all my kids, all the same, and they all bring something special to the table. But Third Way has always done a good job of really articulating many of the most hot button issues that we have to tackle in order to make this the big tent party that we really are.
Jamie, I'm going to end how I started by saying what my mother and father taught me to be the two most important words, and that's thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your leadership. And I will be there any way I can to make sure you are successful as chair. And I was looking through my phone. I still have the text message you sent me on that trip when I left you that week I spent with you in DC. And you said, make certain that your deposits outweigh your withdrawals. And I keep that in my phone. And every now and again, when I feel like I'm not doing enough, I go back and read that message. And that keeps me really grounded and rooted. So I appreciate you, Jamie. Third Way, appreciate you. We'll see you soon.
Well, Antjuan, I can't thank you and Third Way enough for your friendship, for your leadership, for all that you all do for this party. Because I can tell you, many of the wins that we had this last cycle would not have happened without your personal input. I know you put on miles all across this country, going, talking to young Black men and everybody in between, but also for Third Way and all of the leadership that it has exercised over the many years of making sure people are informed, that they're educated and helping them get to the polls. So thank you all for what you all do as well.
We'll see you soon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Take care, my friend.